Hello everyone. Before we get into our pre-recorded show today, we wanted to take a couple of minutes and address the current events with the coronavirus and how it has affected the markets. And we wanted to make sure that we keep you up to date. With me today is Matt Arenz, our Director of Wealth Management and a private wealth advisor in the firm. And we just wanted to spend just a couple minutes and talk about the current market volatility. So Matt, we've definitely experienced, the last couple weeks. I heard that a month ago we hit all-time highs in the market, and now, of course, the markets have been severely affected.
You're right. So significant decline. Two stops in the market in trading the last few days. We've seen things like the NBA cancel their season, March Madness, the NCAA tournament making changes, universities closing down. So I think the U.S. is taking some appropriate steps, while fear-based, but also realistic on how to help quarantine some of this potential outbreak and what that can do. So the markets are responding based on things that are going on. But I do believe that there are still some really good fundamentals working. Unemployment, housing, corporate profits. We'll see how some of that is affected in this next earnings report and potentially the second quarter. But underneath all of this, there is some gold nuggets to be had when it comes to fundamentals.
Yeah, and we really try to encourage people, don't we, to really focus on the destination, not the journey.
Right.
And but also we do think there's probably some more down before we see a bottom.
I think so. I think there's a reality that momentum is carrying this market, uncertainty is carrying this market. It is a real thing, but we do want to bring a sense of calm to the storm that says, focus on the goals, don't focus on the daily values of your accounts. Those are going to fluctuate. Continue to really pay attention to what your goals are, what your objectives are. If you can alter when you take money from your accounts, that's an important thing as well. Realizing dividends are still paying, you can capture the cash from those dividends. Just really be paying attention to the rest of your life financially, not just your account balance.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you're taking the risk, if someone out there is taking the risk of the market, well, yeah, they're down with the market, but many folks do not take the risk of what the market is. So their portfolio is not down what they see on TV.
Sure, and that's a good point. I think one of the things that we've really stressed over the years is making sure you have proper diversification, and that extends to things beyond stocks and bonds. So you really have to have a lot of moving components. You have to have a lot of things that are not correlated to the overall market, and we're seeing those strategies being employed, and they're working. Albeit the accounts are still down slightly, we are seeing that diversification factor stymie the huge volatility, the huge decline in accounts. And so you just have to really review your target allocation, review your portfolio. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to make changes, but you just have to understand how those components are working with each other to, again, bring some calm to the storm.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
So on our website, hilltopwealthsolutions.com, we have a resource center. You'll be able to find good information that will help you think this through. We'll also have updated webinars, so we would encourage you to visit hilltopwealthsolutions.com. We'll get way more into depth about where we're at with the markets and kind of what we see going forward. And as always, if you have questions, you can call our office. We'll jump on a call and we'll talk it through. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. Continuing our discussion on retirement planning and the Secure Act. Today, March 21st on Your Wealth Health. Thank you for joining me today on Your Wealth Health. Excited to be with you this morning. My name is Erik Brenner. I'm President and CEO of Hilltop Wealth Solutions. We're a registered investment advisory firm based in Mishawaka, Indiana. and we're here to help you make financial decisions, give you some education along the way. With me today is Bill Davis, a private wealth advisor with Hilltop. Bill, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Bill, as you know, we've been talking all month about retirement planning, trying to tie in the Secure Act, all the changes that happened January 1st. And Beth and I spent the last couple weeks trying to break down a lot of the main topics, and there's a lot of them.
I think you focused on accumulation, and now I think we're going to start talking about the distribution phase.
Yeah, so you know, it's a really, really big phase. I say it all the time. You're going to hear this all the time here at Your Wealth Health, but you know, coming down the mountain, really your retirement, and you know, retirement's not necessarily just retiring from what you're doing and doing nothing. We're finding a lot of clients are doing something else, aren't they?
Yes, yes. And some are not taking advantage of the tax law changes that you know, took place in 2018, and then of course now the Secure Act in 2019.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of positions now that you know, where someone retires and then they're able to go into you know, an independent consulting role. Mm-hmm. And kind of work on their own terms, but still do where they have an expertise, right? Still
Sure.
work where they have an expertise.
And they can work, you know, they can accumulate qualified assets longer now. You know,
Yep.
the required minimum distribution age moved to age 72. And so we see a lot of professors, a lot of people in professional positions that are continuing to work and continuing to accumulate retirement assets.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think so. And when we think about retirement planning, you know, we think about, even though you may say, look, you know, I'll save, I want to have enough money, and then whoever gets whatever they get, I'm good with that. I mean, ultimately, I think people want to pass the most they can to their loved ones or their charity, mm-hmm. Don't you think?
Yeah, and this really calls for some tax planning, not just tax preparation that most people are used to doing this time of the year as they're collecting all their annual 1099s and their W-2s. But we believe strongly with these new tax rates, there's bigger gaps now for us to take advantage of distribution rates, and the required minimum distribution change, the qualified charitable distribution options that are available to them, you know. Prior to the QCD laws, you were taking out money, paying tax on it, giving it to your charitable organization. You know, now you can give that qualified charitable distribution directly to your church, avoid paying any state or federal income tax.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about tax rates. So if I were to ask you out there in our viewing audience today, do you think the tax rates are higher or lower than they were 10 years ago? What would your answer be? Would it be higher? Most people would think it would be higher. In fact, if you take a look at the screen, Bill, and we want to talk about tax rates in general and the tax comparison, you mentioned it, but you know, talk through those brackets, because this comparison takes a look at 2010 versus 2020 tax rates, and we're actually at historic lows.
Yes, yes, and people's effective tax rates have gone down because of the gap. You know, and now you can earn up to $80,000 taxable income and be in the 12% tax bracket, and then the next tax bracket's 22. If you look back to 2010, once you got above 68,000, you were in the 25% tax bracket, rapidly moving into the 28 tax bracket. So you really have to get all the way up over 326,000 taxable income to even be anywhere close to where you were in the 28% tax bracket 10 years ago.
Yeah, and so, you know, you pointed that out, but I think it's a really important point that, you know, 80,000 to get to 22%, versus in 2010 it was 68,000 of income to get to a 25% bracket. Mm-hmm. So you have more of a span, and you know, the rates are lower.
Yeah, and with these people in their retirement years, they need to be considering taking advantage of these, because maybe they want to take a little bit more out to stay in, let's say, the 12% tax bracket, or even take a little bit more out at the 22% tax bracket, because where do we think taxes are going to go in the future?
Yeah, do you think maybe they're going to go up, going to go down, stay the same?
My guess is they're not going down and they're not staying the same.
Yeah.
We continue to accumulate a $1 trillion a year deficit to our $22 trillion now. And my guess is whatever the politics are in Washington, the likelihood of tax rates staying low for a long period of time probably is not going to be the case.
Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier, and I think it's an important point that tax preparation is not tax planning.
Correct.
And so, somebody should not enter in to the end of the year not having an understanding as to where they're going to fall tax-wise.
Right.
That's really important part, isn't it?
That's a very important part. So understand what the tax brackets are, where you're going to fall. Consider taking some additional income out so that you pay the taxes that you know versus what you don't know in the future. If you're going to wait 4 or 5 years till you're 72, required minimum distribution, the likelihood of what's going to happen is you're going to be in a higher tax bracket down the road, and that's taken out of the equation, the estate planning piece, maybe paying some taxes in your tax bracket versus passing IRA money on to your children who could be in a higher tax bracket.
And of course, what we're talking about here, just for clarification, is we're talking about income taxes.
Correct.
Right? And, the federal estate taxes now, the exemption amount is high, in the millions. Mm-hmm. And so some people, may fall within that and have some federal estate taxes. But in this case, we're talking about income taxes that would be due either now, while you're living and taking distributions, or to your beneficiaries.
Correct.
So really important to kind of think that through. And that also has a mixture as it relates to, your type of assets, Roth IRA, versus a traditional IRA type of investments.
And possibly taking advantage of some Roth conversions. So there is ways to convert traditional IRA money, mostly came from 401ks and qualified plans, and converting that to Roth. And these tax brackets, we need to manage within these tax brackets to do these conversions.
Yeah.
So there's calculations that have to be done and procedures that you have to follow to do that properly.
So when we return on Your Wealth Health, Bill and I will continue to have this discussion around retirement planning and the Secure Act. Don't go anywhere.
At River Valley Construction Group, we pride ourselves on being one of the top deck builders in all of Michiana. If you want to have a beautiful deck, whether it be wood or composite, contact River Valley Construction Group today. River Valley Construction Group, where we're building your dream deck in 2020.
Welcome back to Your Wealth Health, where today we're breaking down the Secure Act and retirement planning. Bill Davis has joined me today, and let's continue the discussion, Bill.
Sounds great.
So you can see under number one, we talked about required minimum distributions moving from 70.5 to 72. The IRA distribution, which we're going to dive into a little bit more detail here in a second. No more stretch IRA to a non-spouse beneficiary. Again, we're gonna dive into an example there here in a second.
Yep.
Right?
And then the qualified charitable distributions, that's a big one.
Yeah, that really is. So let's take a look at an example. What we wanted to do was we wanted to share an example with you as to the old, prior to the Secure Act change of January 1st, 2020, and then the current change. And so I wanted to give you an example here just to paint the picture on how much of an impact this really may have. So if you take a look at the screen, what we have here is $500,000 IRA with an assumed rate of return of 7%, and our beneficiary age is 55. So we're assuming that someone has inherited the money, they're age 55. Mm-hmm. And over on the right-hand side is the old rules. And so the old rules, again, you would have been required to either take it all in lump sum, which would have been all taxable, and for $500,000, that would have been quite the tax bite.
Yep.
Or take it out over life expectancy. And you can see here we have $250,000 drawn over the last 10 years, and that's simply based on a rate of return that we assumed of 7%. and the life expectancy table published by the IRS. And you can see that they would have distributed $697,000. I'm sorry,
Would
the
still be
balance.
left,
The balance would have been $697,000 left in the IRA after 10 years.
Yeah, a lot of people think that life expectancy table means that all the money comes out before your life expectancy, but that never happens.
Yeah.
And especially with an inherited IRA.
Yeah.
So so now, as you say, the under the new act, you're going to have to take it out over 10 years, and that's where we really think the planning opportunities are. Is that you don't have to take it out in equal amounts. We show it as equal amounts, 72,888 a year, and only getting out 711,000 when you almost have that much left in year 11 under the old rules.
Yeah, so I think that difference here and over here is really important to understand, and how these new rules could really affect a situation. So when we talk about we talked about the rates. We mentioned earlier, and we showed an example of these rates, really looking at, we are historically low. And so there is some huge planning opportunities that we see it. But one of the things that I wanted to illustrate for you was what are some projected balances in IRAs. And so if you look at the next one, this is a pretty busy, a lot going on here. But it really gives us a sampling of what an IRA can really grow to. So in this example, we're using beneficiary ages 1955, so they're age 65 today. We're using an expected plan growth of 6%. One of the things that you will see in the work that we do on Your Wealth Health is we're never going to use a unrealistic return number. In fact, we want to even go a little bit more conservative. And so what this illustration says is that in 2020 with $500,000 with a 6% expected plan growth, by the time this individual reaches age 72, so this is the number right here, age 72, $751, almost $752,000 in the IRA. And then we get to this the required minimum distribution, and we've got almost $30,000 in the first year.
Yep. What we're going to come back to, just to point out why you're here, Eric, is see all these years that you had zero. That's an opportunity. Those are opportunity years. Maybe not wait till you have to push out 30,000 year one.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That if somebody's retired, and we see this all the time, where somebody was fortunate enough they retired at 65 or even earlier, and they really don't need the income.
Right. Yeah.
And they say, if I take it out, I'm going to pay tax on it, so I'm just going to leave it in there. And lo and behold, they get there, and now they're required to almost take out $30,000. And you can actually see that with just a 6% overall rate of return, that this account actually grows quite substantially, and therefore it causes the required distributions to go up.
Correct. Yep.
And I think
it's a combination of the government's life expectancy table and just the growth factor. It's just you can't keep up with the growth, and the factor doesn't go up fast enough.
Yeah. So one of the things to keep in mind is many people are under the assumption that your required minimum distribution will go down over time.
Yep. This illustrates that it doesn't, and that's our experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that now this instance is, it's a great problem to have, but this instance is that now all of a sudden, down in several years down the road, you're required to take $48,000, not $29,000. And then, of course, we talked about, at some point someone passes away. In this illustration, they have taken out $584,000, and there's still $821,000 in the pot.
Right.
So you think about it, they've taken out just about 3/4 of what is still in there over their period of lifetime.
Well, and now this shows the spouse, the surviving spouse, taking money out and then passing away, and the amount that's now going to be under that 10-year rule to the next generation.
Yeah. So a lot going on when it comes to distributions. Now, when you think about it, then looking back, as we talked about, we think about from a standpoint of planning. So once you get to age 72 and your required distributions kick in, there's still planning to be involved, but you really have narrowed down some of the options that are available to you. Like, should you do qualified charitable distributions? How do we go about it? Should you do Roth conversions? And we're gonna jump into that. But a lot more options up here prior to getting to 72.
Right, and I think when we come back, we're gonna draw some timeline of that window of opportunity.
Yeah. So, thanks, Bill. So when we return to Your Wealth Health, we're going to dive into that exact what we talked about, window of opportunity, something that you can think about whether you're in that window of opportunity or you will be in that window of opportunity. It's going to be some really important things for you to think about. Join us when we come back.
BNI, or Business Network International, is a huge organization, and today we're in 75 different countries with over 9,000 chapters and 260,000 members, almost 250,000. What it does, it gives a platform for a business owner to generate business for their company. That's really the sole purpose of BNI. So we would invite you to visit a chapter sometime and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, that's fine. What's the worst thing that can happen? You met 30 people you didn't know before.
Welcome back to Your Wealth Health, where Bill and I are talking today about retirement planning, and we want to really get into what we call our retirement planning timeline. So let's share with the folks some thoughts.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy. We want to identify what the window of opportunity is. So, if I'm 60 years old today and I'm thinking about retiring at age 65, that's my first opportunity to identify, how much I have, do I have enough, how much do I need to save so I can make this retirement goal a reality. And then, as we talked about in the last segment, we have to be thinking about that next event, which is age 72, which is that event called the required minimum distribution, or RMD. So we have this window of opportunity wherever age we're at. I mean, it doesn't matter. We have this window of opportunity to identify all of these items. The age of retirement, the savings rate, the rate of return, the risk reward that I'm taking, all of those things to determine, do I have to move the retirement date? Can I move it closer? And the reason I put in age 60, Eric, is that once you've exceeded the age of 59 and a half, you could actually be doing some retirement income distributions while you're still working. And we talked about those, the brackets. And so I think the window of opportunity opens up at the age of 60, once you've exceeded that 59 and a half. And then so what we want to do is, if we do get retired at 65, now we need to be calculating those tax rates to determine, all right, we know an amount that we're going to be forced into at age 72, our required minimum distribution. We know what our income sources are today. And by the way, an important aspect of that is Social Security. So if I'm starting Social Security at 65, I don't want that to be taxed. So we have limits that we have to manage there. But this whole 12-year time period here is probably the area that gives us the best opportunity to this window of opportunity, so to speak, to calculate all these things, from how much can I pull out, how much should I save, those kinds of things.
Yeah, some great points. And so as we think about the timeline, I mean, we think about it from a standpoint of, yes, what you were saying, Bill, is the 12 years, Roth conversions. So especially with the Secure Act now, we believe that certainly you need to look at it. It's not for everyone, right? But this Roth conversion opportunity, and we talked about this in an earlier show, that Roths in general provide really opportunity and flexibility. So from a standpoint of, if you need down here somewhere in retirement a lump sum of money for something. I know we send a lot of money every year to clients just on dental repairs, as an example.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to have a $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 dental bill. Buy a new car, take a great vacation. You know, do we take it out of taxable money, or if we have Roth money, do we take it out of Roth money and really not affect our tax bracket?
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately, if you don't do your conversions prior to age 72, it can be less effective
yeah,
than doing it prior to getting to your required minimum distribution age.
yeah,
Because you can't convert the required minimum amount.
right,
You can convert IRA money,
yeah.
but that RMD money's got to come out as a taxable event.
Yeah, it's a great point. So the other thing to think about is that we do see opportunities when it makes sense during this window of opportunity, and especially if somebody knows pretty much for sure they're going to have, or their beneficiaries are going to have, a fairly large tax distribution in that 10-year window when they receive the money. Maybe in some form of life insurance, right? So replacing some of the money lost in taxes down the road by someone funding some sort of life insurance here. It's certainly not for everyone. It needs to make sense.
Sure. Some kind of a wealth replacement strategy.
Yep.
Because if you have accumulated a lot of qualified assets, somebody's going to pay the taxes.
Right. Somebody will pay it, or unless you leave it all to charity. So, you know, with the wealth replacement strategy, you can leave a lot of your qualified money to charity, and then the life insurance proceeds goes to your beneficiary, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and they don't pay income taxes on it. So that's something they really haven't touched over the many years. Is it's tax-free to the beneficiary.
You know, it goes without saying, Eric, that this requires planning.
Yeah.
So, you know, it requires sitting down with a professional and calculating what is the path that you're on.
Yeah.
And are you underfunded, overfunded? Are you going to have excess in different buckets, which we'll talk about in a future show? But it does require planning.
Sure. So when someone's thinking about retirement planning and what their need is, the first thing that we work through is, what are you going to need in retirement, not what your sources of income are. So an example would be, oftentimes people think, well, I'm going to retire at 65, and so I'm going to have $2,500 a month from Social Security. I've got $1,000 pension. I can take this much from my IRA, and that's my income. Versus saying, you know what, I need $7,000, $8,000 a month. Then determine the best place to take it from.
Correct.
The other thing is that you'll hear us say all the time, we really recommend, it doesn't matter what your neighbor's doing or the person down the street or a coworker, because that could be something that would be totally different.
Yes.
Than what your situation should be.
Yeah, we most commonly coordinate these strategies with our clients, CPA, tax professionals, and make sure that team, many times the estate planning attorney that is drafting the wills and the trusts, those kinds of things, that team can come up with this strategy to have the best outcome.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, Bill, thanks for joining me today and sharing some great information on all the retirement planning, Secure Act, and now the window of opportunity.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And so if you have an interest, or you really want to make sure that you're doing the right things in your window of opportunity, you need to make sure that you're making the right decisions in coordinating all these income streams. And you don't want to be sold a product. It's about being advised based on your best interest. Then we may be able to help. And what we simply do is we simply offer a 30-minute free, no obligation call to get to know you a little bit better, understand your goals, where you're coming from. So we'd encourage you to go to Hilltop Wealth Solutions and go ahead and sign up for a free 30-minute introductory call. Next week on Your Wealth Health, Bill and I will continue to talk about investments, retirement, and how they're taxed. Really, really important stuff. So we'll see you next week.